Hello, it's Sunday the 6th of September. I'm Rob Watson and this is a Decentered media vlog. And I just wanted to go over some things that I posted in a blog yesterday on the Decentered website, which is decentered.co.uk, in which I'm trying to just kind of figure out a way into thinking about communication beyond the kind of mass media marketing transactionalism, and thinking about social communications and community media as a form of mindful media. And mindfulness is one of those concepts that many people are seeing. We see it all around us. There's apps, there's kind of social clubs set up. There's a whole focus, kind of our healthcare system, certainly in the UK and in the West, is becoming very much about a kind of form of mindfulness, which is about, in some way, therapeutic. It allows us or helps us to deal with the stresses and strains of life. It helps us to deal with some of the challenges that we might face in terms of how we engage with one another. And it's done on a basis of thinking about who we are and what our role is. But it's kind of done in a way which is quite simplistic, and it has a fairly superficial approach. So you can look at the techniques in isolation. So, for example, meditation, breathing exercises, yoga, positive thinking. All of these things are encouraged on the basis that they might provide some kind of a solution or help with how we regulate ourselves and our periods of reflection. My typical working day used to be one of getting up in the morning, having some coffee, having some breakfast, getting ready, going out to work, having another coffee, getting through your messages, going to your meetings, doing your classes and meeting with your clients, things like that. And it's really kind of, very fast-paced kind of work. Well, mindfulness kind of says, we've got to figure out, one, how to prioritize those functions, or two, how to remove some of those functions so that we've got a bit more space for ourselves. So keeping things like journals, keeping things like dream diaries become part of the mix. The move towards colouring in books for de-stressing, all really useful. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do these things, but what I am starting to think through and starting to understand is that what they lack is a structure, and they lack a process through which we can actually go on a longer, more relevant journey in which we can actually make some more profound changes, not to ourselves just as individuals, but also more widely as a society. So often the mindfulness approach is sold as a way of achieving more in your life, getting more, raising yourself to a higher level of social status, which actually goes counter to a lot of what the ethical practices are, that the religious and spiritual practices that mindfulness is rooted in advocate. They're about letting go of these things, but the Western consumer-based functional model of mindfulness says that change yourself. It also ignores the situation that you're in. It doesn't say anything really about changing the whole economic model, or the whole built environment model, or the whole ecological model that you're living within. It kind of says adapt yourself and things will adapt around you, and that's not always the case. So we can mindfulness is one of these things I'm beginning to kind of think through and try and understand how it can be used in a positive way to represent, or to talk about, or to elicit further conversation about a different model of social communication. So one of the challenges, I think, is that we have a dominating model of communication which is linear, which is kind of cause and effect, and it suggests that if you put an input into a system, you will get an output. So a message is fed in to a communication system, and at the end somebody responds to that message, whether by purchasing something or at the moment with the pandemic by changing their behavior in some way. And really what we're witnessing and what we're seeing is that whole process is falling apart, and that the messages aren't getting through to people in the kind of depth, and they're not sticking and they're not lasting, and the messages maybe appeal to one group of the population, but that then excludes other groups of the population. So I'm very critical, and I've written about this, that the communications model has gone wrong and is wrong, and that we need to think about how we can change the communications model to something which is more adaptive, more responsive, more resilient, and more decentralized, away from a command and control type mindset. So that's why I'm thinking that mindfulness might be a useful way into this, as a way of saying, let's think about how we can step back from this process. How can we step back from the input-output model, from the cause and effect model, from the, if you go back to your Media Studies 101, from the hypodermic syringe model, injecting people with a particular message, or the the viral message. We have a viral pandemic, and we need to counter that with viral messages. Well, that is proving that we get negative outcomes and conspiracy theories as much as we get positive outcomes and collective social benefit from that. So it's a narrow way of communicating, and I think what we need to do is broaden our communication out. And a couple of factors I think are essential for this, and I want to try and start to encourage discussion around these areas. And I view this in a very progressive way, socially progressive way. This is big P politics as well as small p politics, is that, if we get this right, then there are many other things that follow on from it that are socially progressive. And I put it firmly in there, this is not about protecting people's already entrenched social status and wealth and benefit, but about redistributing and challenging how those people got that wealth in the first place, because it was accumulated in a way which was not open, transparent, and for the benefit of the many. So this is about saying, that phrase, information is power, and those who have the information wield the power. That's what I mean. We need to challenge that whole notion, and we need to help people to recognize that they have the skills, the capability, and the experience and the life knowledge which is essential. Now, interestingly, the communication process has changed. We've gone from a broadcast system which dominated the 20th century to a network setup now, but our thinking is still lags. It still falls behind. We think in terms of broadcast channels. We tailor messages to television or radio or newspapers or now social media. But what we're not doing is, and the successful organisations that do this are already ahead of this game, is we're not looking at individual requirements or the network and communities that people live in. So one of the criticisms of the communications process for the pandemic has been that it's not recognised people's lived experience. It's not recognised people's symbolic experience of the kind of symbolic framework that people live in. And it also hasn't recognised people's resource experience. So what kind of access do they have to different types of technology, for example? And it hasn't recognised people's literacies, people's ability to manage these processes and to recognise these processes and not just be the butt of them, but to be principal, autonomous, empowered citizens within a social communications process itself. So mindfulness for me is, you can probably tell this is kind of recent thinking really, and I've not fully developed everything, a long way from fully developing everything. But there's a few key factors that I think we have to consider. One is that we need to look at communications from an intracultural perspective. So we have don't assume that we live in a monoculture, that everybody thinks the same, that everybody's cultural experience makes reference to the same things that we see around us. That's very narrow, and increasingly it's narrower to think that what gets broadcast, for example, on a BBC local radio station is the dominant culture. It's a minority culture now for most people, because most people don't listen to it. You look at it, 10-15% of the population listen to a local BBC radio station on a regular basis. They are no longer part of the majority culture. Is there a majority culture? Because there's lots of subcultures, and people are being addressed on social media individually. So don't make the assumption that what you see on your social media feed is what everybody else is seeing. No, that's unique to you. It's designed. We have the capacity and the capability, and the algorithms that reinforce your social media news feeds, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, or whatever, are designed to respond to your individual preferences and likes and behaviours and tolerances, and what gets you indignant and what gets you supportive. That's what these tech companies are doing. They're individualizing, the whole process of communication. It's not this broadcast process that it used to be. So we also have to understand that people don't share the same model framework of consciousness. Is that there are different frameworks of consciousness out there. Is that we look at things symbolically and make sense of the world in different ways. And some people might still have a 19th century framework of consciousness that they work in. Some people might still have a 20th century framework of consciousness that they live in and work with it, and it works very well. Some people might have an emerging 21st or 22nd century framework of consciousness. It doesn't mean to say that we value them any differently, but we have to accept that there are not only cognitive differences in the way that we view and interact with the world, but there are also issues about our consciousness. So failing to address people on multiple levels. Children have been very badly addressed in the pandemic, and what their role is and what their potential contribution is. Young people have been very badly addressed. There's been no mission for change that young people could get behind. They've just been told to go to the pub, enjoy the things that you used to enjoy, live your life of vicarious consumerism, and just get on with it. Nothing that says we want to enlist you to build a better tomorrow. Nobody's been given a mission, because there's a kind of fear of change, and what change actually means is going to be quite deep rooted. And I suppose for me, mindfulness is about that point where we are aware that we are part of we are a contributor to, we are part of the process of change. And if we do it mindfully, with a sense of awareness, then we can help to direct that change. If we're just oblivious to the change, we'll just get carried along by it, and it will be done to us by other people who we don't necessarily. Suddenly we wake up and realise that the world has been shaped, but not in our own interests, in somebody else's interests. So there's a lot to be thinking about with this process, and I'm as I always say, I'm at the foothills with this. It will probably inform my work and my politics over the next few years. I'd like to start to think about how this can be implemented in terms of community media, and usually it's by telling stories. Usually it's about grounding one's experience and linking it with other people's experience. So getting people to tell their stories would be a primary objective for this. I'm going to keep writing about it. I'll keep posting things on the blog, and hopefully try and organise some podcasts around these topics as well, and start to think through what do we, I'm not so well informed about some of these things, and I'd like to think that there's some kind of really engaging conversations to be had out of this. If you want to share your insight, your thoughts, your experience, then please do get in touch. I'm on Twitter at Decentered Media, Instagram the same, Decentered Media, and the website is decentered.co.uk. If you like this video, press subscribe or wherever it is that people do and say that you should do on YouTube. And I'll post another one in a couple of days, just to kind of keep my thoughts bubbling along and moving forward. But until next time, I'm going to press stop. Thank you very much.